Speaker's Craig Dalzell, who's the head of policy at Weal, and is going to speak to us about the National Care Service, a subject that's very dear to the heart of this branch. So Craig, without further ado, if you...
Fantastic. Now, if I speak at this volume, can everybody at the back and everyone on the screen hear me? Yes. Fantastic. Right, so I was, when I was discussing what I could talk about here, I was throwing out a few options, and two options kind of sparked the attention, which was one, to just get everyone up to speed with where we are with the National Care Service, especially with the way that the bill has ended up in Parliament right now. The other option that came up was, right, we're all in favour of a publicly owned care service, aren't we? Right, how do we actually do it? We couldn't decide which of those two talks to give, so you're getting both, if I'm quick enough. So yeah, after a very long campaign, the National Care Service bill is dead. I've been in this fight basically since 2020. More or less when the care service was announced. That's what kind of got Weal interested in care specifically, especially once we hooked up with Nick Kemp, who I know has spoken to this branch before. We put a lot of effort into trying to get a national care service that is worthy of that name as the NHS is. And unfortunately, we were at the very end in the coalition that killed it as well, and put it out of its misery, because the bill that we got was simply not fit for purpose. It never was, and we warned about that from day one, that if the government kept going the way they were going, they would get to where we got to. So it started really in 2022 when the care service bill first appeared in Parliament. And what we got wasn't a comprehensive blueprint for how to provide care to everyone on a publicly owned not-for-profit basis, but instead what we got was what's known as a framework bill. Now, this is when the government essentially puts up a bill that says there shall be a national care service, and will give ministers the power to sort it out later. Can you imagine if that had happened back in 1997 with the Scotland Act and devolution? If Donald Dewar had stood up and gave his famous proclamation, there shall be a Scottish Parliament, but we'll work out the details later. In particular, there was a clause in there, clause 29, Article A, that basically gave Scottish ministers complete power to confer to themselves all of the functions of care in Scotland. A massive power grab that would have taken all power at local authorities and potentially put it in the hands of the Scottish ministers. And we've seen more and more of these framework bills happen, especially since COVID, especially since the government has essentially got to the point of trying to get the headline of the announcement, but then we'll work out the details later. It's just not acceptable to have this kind of flimsy legislative process. Legislation should be the end of the process, not the beginning. Because what happened with that bill was everybody else had to chase to fill in those gaps, and we were under the politicians' time pressures to make that happen, especially on an electoral cycle. And the Parliament's complained about this as well, with multiple committees saying that they couldn't scrutinise a bill that had nothing in it. Particularly the Finance Committee, who have been really good at saying, look, we can't tell you if the National Care Service will be value for money, you haven't given us a budget yet. Skip forward a year, 2023, the pressure's been mounting over what to do with this. The government eventually stood down and said, right, okay, instead of ministers having all of the power, we will come to an agreement with COSLA and with the NHS, and we'll form this kind of tripartite body that will manage the care service. The problem is, when they announced this, they were already halfway through a process of engaging with stakeholders like Weal, like Unite, like our friends in other unions and in the care sector, to co-design the care service from top to bottom. And then they came out with this political deal that blindsided everyone. It hadn't been discussed with any stakeholders. I remember the first stakeholder meeting after that announcement. People were livid that this deal had been made behind closed doors. Especially the representative from the NHS, who was saying, look, we've just been dumped with this managerial responsibility that we didn't even ask for political ends. So again, it was this idea that the government was just not listening to people, not listening to the people who were supposed to be telling them what to do. 2024, after several delays to the bill, after several pauses to the bill, and especially in January 2024, a few weeks after denying that there would be any more delays, the government paused the bill again. And eventually, after the committees were losing their patience and saying, look, the bill as it stands is no longer fit for purpose. We can't vote for the bill at the stage one vote, especially given that it doesn't even mention the things that you agreed to last year, like that tripartite agreement. So we need to see what the Scottish Government intends to change about the bill before we can vote on it at stage one. And the government said no. What we'll do is we will get you to pass that framework bill as it stands, and then we'll give you the amendments. Very, very reluctantly, the committees agreed. The Parliament was actively voted down on it. There was a Labour amendment to push the bill back until those amendments were published. It was voted against. So the stage one bill was eventually passed in February, 65 to 50. SNP and the Greens voted for, everybody else voted against. The deadline started looming over when those amendments should have been published, and then right before the government said we will publish those amendments, they said no. What we're going to do is we're going to set up an expert legislative advisory group that will scrutinise those amendments before we can publish them and give them to the committees and give them to Parliament. I was right on the phone within minutes saying, how can I get involved? So again, a lot of our stakeholders, including our friends in Unite, were involved in that legislative group, and we were given 12 weeks to scrutinise these amendments, except we weren't given them. Basically, we were once a week we were in these meetings and we were talking about general principles of the care bill and what could be done and what should be discussed. We were never actually given the amendments until the very, very last meeting. So to say it's been a very frustrating process throughout is an understatement. We actually Commonweal towards the end of that advisory process got so frustrated we just published our own list of amendments to the care bill. And I know others did the same, but that was the tipping point where you had groups like COSLA and the STUC decide to pull their support for the bill entirely. In October 2024, the Scottish Greens joined them. There was a motion at the party conference that said that the membership had no more faith in the bill as it stood, and that they couldn't support the idea of a national care service built on that blueprint. And that was the final death knell, because at that point the SNP having only minority support in the government, they no longer had the Green Cooperation Agreement to whip the Greens into compliance on this. They didn't have the votes to get the bill through. So there was another pause over what should be done. Commonweal published a paper that basically said, right, you've got a couple of options here, because there are good things in this bill. The care service framework is a mess, it's not going to work, but what we can't do is lose some of the very positive things in that bill, things like Anne's Law, things like the right to respite, things like a carers charter, a national social work agency. But what we also pointed out was a lot of these things probably shouldn't have been in that bill in the first place, and a lot of them probably didn't need primary legislation at all. So we published a paper that said, right, you could do these things with primary legislation on a bespoke basis. Anne's Law would be a good example of that. You don't need a national care service to give people the right to see their family in a care home. You could do it through some of it through secondary legislation. You could do some of it just through regulation, or just the minister saying this is now government policy. But if you wanted, if that was going to take too much time going through all the parliamentary process, then you could just take the care service framework out of the bill, rename the bill as some sort of care reform bill, and do it that way. And that's the approach that the Scottish Greens favoured, and it's the approach that the SNP eventually took earlier this year. So that's kind of where we are now, because that bill, renamed a care reform bill, with the framework of the National Care Service taken out, is what passed at stage 2. Now that's not the job done for that, because a lot of those clauses, things like I mentioned Anne's Law, there needs to be scrutiny of the precise wording of those clauses. There are clauses in there that we're still not happy with. There's one in particular that opens up the possibility of civil and criminal sanctions being levied against carers if there's a mistake. That we're not happy with. It's kind of a legacy of the way that this has all been cobbled together. There's probably very detailed work that just happens when you do take a third of the bill out of the legislation. There's all kinds of loose ends that fly off that they need to be tamped down. And there's still things that could be added and improved. I'm sad to say that there was a Labour amendment in there that would have allowed local councils to put a cap on the profits on private care, for instance. And the way that was worded, they could have allowed local authorities to set that profit cap to zero. So that could have been a way to have essentially not-for-profit care be the legal basis in Scotland. That amendment, as far as I know, was rejected. It might come back in stage 3, it might come back in another way. So, yeah, the care service as it is, though, is dead. But it has to come back because we still support it. We still support the idea of a national care service. We don't think that just fixing the problems now is going to be sufficient. A lot of those problems do need to be fixed. But the way I've been talking to ministers is do not mistake patching the holes in the dam for fixing the dam. Right? We still need a national care service to fix those fundamental underlying problems with care on a long-term basis. But that shouldn't prevent us from helping carers where we can now. So it's really going to be a political process now to get that national care service back on the table. The SNP say they still support it, the Greens say they still support it, Labour say they still support it. Labour, Tories and the Lib Dems are kind of fundamentally against the concept, so there's still a bit of a fight there. But it's now about timing and process, and unfortunately we're now also going up against the deadline of the parliamentary elections next year. I don't think we're going to see a national care service this side of those elections, and how it comes back and when it comes back will be dependent on those elections. If you want me to give a bit more details of what I think the actual positions of each of the parties are, ask me in the Q&A. So that's where we are. Part 2, why we need a public care service and how do we get it. This feels like a talk I could have given maybe not me, but I could have given in the 1940s when we were discussing why should we have a public health service. The two issues are not entirely overlapping, but very closely overlapping. There was a really good paper put out by the STUC back in 2022 called Profiting from Care. The subtitle was Why Scotland Can't Afford a Privatised Social Care. And it takes us through a lot of the issues that happen in that privatised system. About 3/4 of care homes in Scotland are run on a private basis. About 2/3 of care services in total are run on a private basis. The report from the STUC found that across the UK, not just Scotland, that about £15 billion was extracted from the care service in profits alone. That's the money that goes off into the profits to dividends or fees from subsidiaries to their parent companies. On a slightly tangential note, Commonweal just last week published a paper on foster care in Scotland. In Scotland, it is illegal to run foster care services on a for-profit basis, but we found a lot of companies that are involved in foster caring do manage to extract profits. They'll have a not-for-profit company that provides the foster care service, but it'll be owned by a for-profit parent company, and there's various ways they can shunt money to the for-profit side. Service fees, rents, giving unsecured, never to be repaid back loans to their for-profit care company, and such like. A lot of those for-profit companies are also based in tax havens. So it's, do you want kids fostered by a company that is run in a tax haven? Is really the question we're asking in that paper. Back to care more broadly, that figure of £15 billion extracted from the care sector across the UK, the STUC calculated that's approximately equivalent to about £10,000 per nursing home bed per year in profits. So if we were to run the care sector on a not-for-profit basis, then that's the saving you could expect, £10,000 per year per nursing home bed. The problem's not just the high fees though. The private care sector has been shown to create worse outcomes for both clients and for staff. The GMB published a report saying that care staff in private care are paid on average about £1.64 an hour less than their public sector counterparts doing the same job.
That's right.
The odds of a complaint in a private care home are much more likely to be upheld. If you have a complaint that you put in about a family member or whatever in a private care home, the chances of that complaint being upheld are about 50%. In a public care home, it's more like 19%. And unlike public care homes, private care homes are exempt from transparency measures like freedom of information. If a care home is owned by a local authority, you can submit FOI requests to find out details about their finances or the information they hold on the residents there or whatever, or management structures or whatever. If, though, a local authority sells that same care home to a private company and then becomes the sole contractor for that private company, so there's no one else other than who the local authority sends, that company is exempt from FOI. So there's a big danger there that the privatisation of services could result in, these services being shielded from democratic transparency. Now, work is underway here. I'm glad to say the Scottish Government is seriously looking at this. There's also, within what remains of the Care Service Bill, and there's also a Members' Bill by Labour MSP Katie Clark that would extend freedom of information to care homes that are in receipt of public money. Katie Clark's bill actually would extend that to all private companies that are in receipt of public money, and that's a recommendation that came out of a roundtable in 2019 on freedom of information, on scrutinising the current freedom of information legislation. It's been a long time coming. I was in a meeting about the practicalities of that just this week, but honestly that meeting, while it was really good, really positive, I could have had that meeting 2 weeks after I was at that roundtable in 2019. So yeah, very frustrating process, but hopefully we'll get there. So how do we nationalise care? First, nationalise is probably the wrong word. Care should be publicly owned, but it should also be locally delivered. So that doesn't mean it should be nationally owned. So the more precise way of talking about this is how do we bring care into public ownership? If you want to use nationalise as a shorthand for that, I'm fine with that. I just don't want to get back into the same problem of the ministers own all care of in Scotland. So, so it should be publicly owned. There are three broad options that we've identified. We can either buy everything all at once. This was the model that Jeremy Corbyn was exploring with the energy system a number of years ago. We could buy everything out gradually, or we can use a model that we call wither on the vine. I'll take you through them. Option one, buy it all at once. This is obviously the option that if you were an accountant working in Shona Robinson's office planning the budget for next year, this is the one that would give you sleepless nights. But it might be cheaper than it looks. Christie's estimated that the total value of the care estate in Scotland is about £2 billion. It's a lot of money. But if I was that accountant sitting in Shona Robinson's budget meeting, £2 billion is right at the top end of what I think the Scottish Government could do if it really wanted to. If Shona Robinson was given the instruction, you need to find £2 billion to do this, and it only needs to be a single year, single budget thing, you could be squeezing the less essential parts of the capital budget. You could be looking at how much money you could borrow. You could be looking at, say, a one-off wealth tax. Or other things like that. You could probably pull together about £2 billion. The critical thing here is it's not 20 billion, it's not 200 billion. £2 billion is a lot. but it's not as much as it could be, and it's probably not even that much. Because if you look at care homes that have been brought into public ownership in Scotland, I think really of Home Farm in Skye that was bought by the Scottish Government and then given to NHS Highland for the sum of £900,000. Now, if you take the per bed cost that represents and extrapolate that across all of Scotland, this is some work that Nick Kemp did for us, you struggle to get a number that's bigger than about 1 billion. So 1 billion is a lot more doable than 2 billion. So if the Scottish Government really wanted to nationalise everything everywhere all at once in the care sector, problem's not as insurmountable as it might initially sound. However, option 2 is the one that maybe gives the accountants a few more hours in their bed. The Scottish National Investment Bank is currently being capitalised by the Scottish Government to the tune of about £200 million a year. This is a 10-year programme that will eventually capitalise the SNIB up to £2 billion. We're currently about halfway through that process, more or less. Now, if you were thinking a bit longer term within government circles, you could be thinking, right, we're going to be finished capitalising SNIB in about 5 years. What are we going to do with the £200 million in the budget in year 6? Imagine you started buying out care homes. If you have that sum of £1 billion and the Scottish Government was to dedicate £200 million a year, then we spend 5 years finishing off the SNIB project, then 5 years buying out care. By 2035-ish, you could have brought all of care in Scotland into public ownership. They can already afford £200 million a year because they're already spending it on something else. Other options, and as again was something that Nick Kemp has considered, is a public care bond. Allow savers in Scotland to bring care into public ownership, allow them to own a bit of care. Allow us to put our savings into a fund that would allow the care sector to be brought into public ownership. There are, local authorities have much more expansive borrowing powers than the Scottish Government has when it comes to revenue generating items. So it's very difficult for a local authority to borrow for, say, a hospital or a school because they don't inherently generate a lot of revenue. But even on a not-for-profit basis or a far less profit than the private sector basis, a care home is a revenue generating item. So the local authorities would have the power to borrow to invest in local care. At the level of profits recorded by the private sector, those investments would pay back in about a decade. If you wanted the Scottish public care sector to be as profit extracty as the private sector is, if you wanted to cut fees, improve services, improve conditions for staff, well, let's call it 20. I can imagine an investment project paid back over 20 years. That's still less than a mortgage. Option 3 is wither on the vine. Instead of putting all those resources into buying out the private care sector, what happens if we instead put those resources into building up the public care sector? If you've got a private nursing home that you're not happy with, imagine the local authority, instead of buying it out, they build a publicly owned one next to it. Right? Imagine you're looking at where you want to put a family member into a nursing care home. Maybe you're thinking about a place for yourself or whatever, and you're thinking, right, well, that one there is charging, the private sector one is charging £60,000 a year for a nursing home bed, and £10,000 of that is going to Jersey or the Cayman Islands, and the staff are getting paid not much more than minimum wage, and there's so many complaints coming out of that place that it's really not looking like a very good place to be. Whereas the one right next door is charging £50,000 a year. The care staff are paid a lot better, the conditions are better, and there's fewer complaints. Which one are you going to get a place in? And what happens to the private sector one when all the staff move over and all the clients move over? What is the value of a £1 billion business that has no staff and no clients? We could just simply outcompete the private sector, and then if we do want their assets at the end of it, we can buy it for £1. So, conclusion. The loss of the National Care Service was regrettable, but a necessary setback by the time we got to it. It must be brought back. It must be brought back. We cannot allow the politicians to say that project failed and we're never touching it again because we're scared of failing again. But it must be designed properly this time. Instead of waiting for another framework bill to come out and then we'll scrabble together a plan that fits within it, why can't we design the National Care Service that we deserve, and then once we're happy with the design, pass the legislation that brings that into effect? That's how we design the National Health Service. Why can't we do that for care?
Okay.
And when it comes to the sector, bringing the sector into public sector, it looks far cheaper than it could be. There are options there. The only thing that's stopping us from doing it, again, as with the NHS before us, the only thing that stops us is the political will. So that's the message to the politicians. Do you have the will to do it? Or, well, there's an election coming up next year. Who does? Thank you. Happy to take some questions.
Thanks very much, Craig. So I'm going to open up to questions and contributions from the floor, and then hopefully you can come back and sum up at the end. Anybody? David? Anybody else?
You say the political will and to do it. And the Scottish Government, as you know, they embarked on a consultation process. But it was basically, presented as a fait accompli.
Yeah. The
service was designed by PricewaterhouseCoopers. And they came back to organisations like the STUC, like Weal, like the Scottish Pensioners Forum. We put forward, our objections, and they didn't listen.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, you saying there's elections coming up in 2026. Sure, but if we're going to have the same hard job convincing the politicians to come up with the right policy. Do you agree?
I think that's why we need our friends in the care sector and the broader activist movement to provide that policy. Don't know to get too proprietorial about it, but Commonweal did produce a comprehensive blueprint on what we think a national care service should look like. We know that others have come up with their ideas as well. We don't need to get into too much of a bun fight over whose idea is better. But that basic principle of, okay, the government were incapable of coming up with a plan. They did outsource it to PricewaterhouseCoopers, and their target operating model went out to KPMG. That's obviously not acceptable. So instead of let us review your plan, how about we just say to them, here's our plan, who's going to take it up?
Anybody else?
Is there any truth in the danger? Your own property can be in danger of getting a private nursing home. Even though you've got a will made out, the nursing home, due to the fees that they charge privately, that your house could become theirs.
I can't honestly answer that one either way.
Could you repeat that, Joe? Because I think a number of folk haven't heard
so
it. Just a question.
The question was: is there any danger that if you're in these private care homes and the fees getting charged get too much? Could there be a point where they start putting a lien in your property and taking your property in compensation? I can't honestly. I don't know. Is the simple answer to that?
It's just that I was at a lawyer last week.
Yeah.
And that's what I was told.
There's two of them, yourself and then one at a time. You first and then you, Kate.
In my experience, I think what happens is if you need care, then you get it, the local authority will fund it, and when you pass, then your estate will pay back that portion. At the moment, if you get care, you get paid for nursing care, so that the council will provide that and something else, and you have to make up the rest. But in my experience, what they do is they wait until the person's deceased and the will is sorted, and then they will want back what they took. I don't think there's any danger of them. I could be wrong, but I don't think there's any danger of them getting out of the house. But there is this issue: if you need care, then you don't need a house, eh?
No. But then,
Take a share.
your family,
Aye,
That estate is gone.
I'm not going to put your wife at the house, no.
No, but
Wait, one at a time, please. Okay.
No, I was just going to say that I think you have to sort of make sure that you get your house in order there. That if you are a couple in a house, you have to set up something like a trust will to make sure that they, when they come looking for fees, you can only take that half of the house that's in your name if you need the care. And I know from personal experience, because we were looking after an elderly aunt and uncle that now both passed away, and they've come back and hit us with a bill. You know, they sort of have said that, you know, they would pay so much fees towards this care home, and now they're coming back with a bill that we've got to pay this bill. You're right, you know, once the estate's settled, almost settled, then they rejig it and come back and say, this is what you now have to pay. My aunt's case is 24,000.
Just on this topic, previously we've had Doc Mullally, one of the union lawyers, come and talk to us, and it's certainly on the schedule for a future one. So it's obviously something that, although we've had it a couple of times, had to talk about this, she'd be more than willing to come back, and I think we should have another meeting with her so that we can get up-to-date information on what the situation is.
And there's no doubt about it, you know, with this current crisis, and you know, councils are cash strapped, so they're now going to be coming after you more than ever. You know, and to a certain extent, I have this other feeling, well, why shouldn't you pay for care? You know, if you can afford it, you know. But yeah, I think that councils are so cash strapped now that they will come after everybody for everything.
Last point.
Who?
You.
Me?
That's what I was-
You were looking over there. Yeah, Unite, as you probably know, was one of the first, or the first union actually to withdraw.
Yeah.
And what was happening was our Assistant General Secretary, Mary, was going to meeting after meeting after meeting, and it was just a big merry-go-round. You probably know Mary. And it was just a complete waste of time. And we pulled out and basically said, I can't remember the conditions off the top of my head, but basically unless these conditions were met, we were just not going to waste our time and resources on it. But I think the problem is that right at the very beginning, was it Jean Alexander who was the health, Jean Freeman who was the health, and she said right at the very beginning, it wasn't going to be a publicly owned health service. I mean, she made that absolutely quite clear, and the SNP made that clear right throughout. That was not their intention. Even when it came to collective bargaining, you know, they didn't even agree collective bargaining. I think it was tentatively in the local authority sector they were talking about it, but across the board, even certain things like that never actually came to the fore. Now, in terms of the other parties, Labour, just take Labour, impression I get is, you know, I'm in the Labour Party and I'm sort of involved in that, and the impression I get is that the politicians are sick to death of the National Care Service, because it's been around for 4 or 5 years. You know, they've been involved in it all, and the impression, and obviously they didn't say that, but that's the impression I get. They're just sick to death of it. So we really need to put the pressure on. And in terms of Labour, I don't see any great commitment there. It is in theory, but I don't see it again in practice. Things that have been said to me are, we've got to be careful because we'll spook the market, right? What they're scared of is if they start to, which is one of the problems actually, I'd like your view on this, in terms of the gradual approach. What is said is if you start to gradually take over, then a lot of the other capitalist homes, they'll start to take fright and exit the market. And unless you've got capacity there to soak up that, you know, that when they exit the market, you're able to sort of take that on, then clearly you would be in a bit of a sticky wicket there. So the the fast route seems to be the best route, whereas you can actually, as long as you've got the capacity, or you're taking over the capacity, because otherwise these companies, if they see that their profit is going to be not there for very long, they'll start exiting, and then you'll have all these care homes closing, and there won't be anywhere to put people. So the two things have to go at the same time. But Unison also produced a very good document paper about 2 or 3 years ago, and that actually put the case that the National Care Service isn't just a nice idea. It actually is the only way we can have a decent health service, a decent care service, because the private sector just doesn't work. It just doesn't work, and it's clear. So I don't see Labour or the SNP, taking the bull by the horns. So we're interested to see what you
Yeah,
think.
can come back in a couple of points.
Well, I'm going to just bring you back in. There's other folk had their hands up, but we're going to run out of time.
Sorry,
So
somebody online, David Borry.
we'll let him in then. So I didn't
David.
see- David.
Sorry, I can't find them will be on Zoom to raise my hand, so apologies, Chair, for
It's all right. I'll let you in then.
butting in. So yeah, I just wanted to make the point. So I was just a few minutes late to joining the meeting, so maybe this point's been made already. But I just feel really strong that the care system should be part of the NHS. It's never made any sense to me that, for example, people with Alzheimer's or vascular dementia are not seen as having a health issue. It's part of the ageing process, certainly, but it just doesn't make sense to me to have a separate arrangement for care when all of the expertise and all of the synergy already exists within our beloved NHS. And so, yeah, I understand the need for a national care service, but why does it have to be delivered, or why has it historically been delivered by local authorities? I'm guessing that was a political decision back in the day, and I don't know the history of it, so apologies for that. But surely there's a way of just creating some primary legislation which allows the NHS to take on responsibility for care from cradle to grave, whether you need health care or not, whether you need social care or whether you need help with dressing in the morning or get to bed at night. It should all be part of our national health service, and I've always felt strongly about that.
Okay,
Okay.
right, thanks. I'll
So-
bring David back.
So we've been
Craig, sorry.
Yeah, we've been against that full integration of health and care, partly on a political reason. The political reason being health always seems to be the one that the politicians have more prestige for, and we were really worried that would result in, whenever they had some money to go into health and care, it would go into health, not care. But the bigger reason is that while a lot of care issues are health issues, a lot of care issues are not health issues as well. Care is a much broader sector than just the health aspects of it. So get me back sometime and I'll give you a full rundown of our blueprint of what care looks like, sort of as that separate part from the health service, and what it means for people who need the care but not the health aspect. To just respond to your point on that gradual approach to public ownership and it spooking the markets, well, you basically give the markets the choice of, right, you can wait your turn to be bought out at the asset value, or if you want to exit the market, we'll compulsory purchase you for £1. Because the thing is with that care home is, yeah, the company might leave, but the care home is still there and the staff are still there. So when they leave, it's not as if the care home closes down and you have to move everyone into another care home. You can keep them in place and take over the running of the care home like they did with Sky. If companies want to leave sooner, then fine, but you'll get a discount on the money you'll get paid, and that makes it cheaper for everyone, cheaper for us as well. So and finally, on another good talk to come back to would be, how do we pay for care? whether that is that personal payment or a contribution to that, or whether we see this, like health, as something that should be universal. So, universally provided, free at the point of need, and paid for by all of us, because all of us need care at some point in our lives, or all of us will provide care, or both. So, a good discussion there. I'd like to be part of it.
Yeah, they could manage it in the 50s after the Second World War. I grew up with a care home, council owned, living across the road from the housing scheme I lived in. And it was a wonderful care home. Nowadays, all those things have gone, and they've gone because of profit, because wealth's been transferred from ordinary people to the super rich. So we've got a big fight in our hands, but it's worth fighting, I think. I'd like to thank you very much for your introduction. Also, you mentioned you do a slideshow on it, that we might be interested in the slides if that's possible.
There was nothing in my slides that I didn't mention in the talk, but I'll pass over the slides to Linda, and we can circulate them along with the video.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you.
And if we get details of the website as well, that would be good that you mentioned.
This will be shown. James, where's this is available, this talk?
Oh, sorry, yeah, right.
It's recorded and available on our website.
Our website.
Right,
Yeah.
so if you miss some of it, you can hear all of it, or if you want to get some more, want to listen to it again, on our website, okay?
Yeah, and please visit our website, commonweal.scot. You can see all of our policy papers there. It can be they're all open access, especially all the ones on care. And yeah, let us know what you think of them.
Okay, thanks very much, and let's show up this.